Thank you, Harold. One life to invest. That's what we're going to be kind of talking about. Next week is communion. We're going to do that with our trays, with with our homemade communion bread. So that means you need to prepare for that. That means you need to kind of prepare your hearts, prepare your minds, so that we can come to the table, so that we can really remember and really celebrate what Christ has done, what Christ is doing in our life. So that's important. So spend this week in preparation for that. So let's jump right into this. So if you've raised kids or been part of a family, you know that if you have two different kids, sometimes you talk to them differently, depending upon where they're coming from, depending upon what their likes are and what they do, their motivational style. You just speak to them differently. Um, think about this. When you're in different groups, let's say you got a group of friends who might like to camp. You got a group of friends who might like to hunt. You got a group of friends who might like to be at the gym, right? You're going to talk differently to those groups of people, right? Andrew and I were talking about doing, different pieces of equipment he was doing at the gym this morning. Well, some people, if you've never been to the gym, would have no clue what we're talking about, right? So you talk differently about that with different groups of friends. Basketball. Oh, let's say football. If anybody doesn't know this, today is Super Bowl Sunday. So some people could care less about that, and some people are like stoked about that. We've got the chili cooking at the house today, I think already for tonight. But you're going to talk differently about that. You're going to say, gee, did you hear about Lamar? He's the MVP. And people are going to say, who's Lamar? Now, for those of you who live under a rock, he's the quarterback for the Ravens and all that, one of the only ones that were unanimously voted on, by the way. But the point is, we'll talk differently to different groups of friends. Jesus has been doing this. Over the past 3 weeks, we've been talking about Jesus telling stories to a particular group of people. He's talking different to. Luke 14, Luke 15, all the stories we've been talking about, the countless times. We've got this in Scripture for the past 20 centuries. People have been telling these stories that Jesus has been talking about to this certain group of friends. Well, not friends, but people. He was trying to connect to that group of people. So we've been talking about the stories of the great banquet, the lost sheep, the lost coin, the prodigal son from last week. And if you've missed any of that, all I can say is go to our podcast, go to our live streams, because it's all there. So while Jesus is telling these stories to a certain group of people, he's aware of another group of people that was there. They were listening, but he hasn't talked to them yet directly, because he would use different language. He would use different stories. You see how this plans out. This group wasn't opposed to him like the Pharisees were. It was a group of what we would call insiders, okay? When I started talking about the Super Bowl, some of you guys started to smile. You would be called insiders. The rest of you guys are just lost, okay? But you see what I'm saying. I'm kidding, but you see the point. This is what Jesus was doing, right? This is what Jesus was doing to the Pharisees, and now he's going to be talking to this group of insiders, okay? This is how this is working out. This is a group that was committed to him. This is a group that made the decision to just follow him at all costs. They were serious about this. They were committed. They were trusting and obeying, like the song we just sang. So in Jesus' typical fashion, when he's done talking to the outsiders, Jesus tells a story that's confused people for centuries about this scoundrel, about this person who just, he was mistreating people, didn't have a lot of character, but he was serving someone with a little bit of character. So the story today kind of will connect to us regardless of kind of where you're at with Jesus. Some of you guys might be this, the one life to invest. We heard a story of, Morris investing in someone's life hours away from here. a lifetime of investment, right? For Jesus. Maybe you're not there yet. Maybe you're just kind of on the outsides. Maybe this whole church thing is like, well, I know I need it, but I'm not quite there yet. And this story is going to connect to you. I guarantee it. Some of you guys came forward last week coming home to Jesus, making that stand. Some of you guys might have been thinking about through this week. This story is going to connect you in a different way, in a lot of different ways. What are you doing with your time? What are you doing with your talents? Who are you investing in? And this is where the story comes into play. All right, but the first thing you need to know, because this is a very confusing story, you have to understand Palestinian culture. You need to understand Middle Western culture, because get this, the gospel is not American stuff. Think about this. People walked around in turbans and all the time, different dress, different robes. They weren't us. And so many times in America, we want to Americanize everything. You got to get that out of your mind here for a minute. This is not how this works. This is not what Jesus wants you to take away from this today. So I'm going to ask Karen to come on up. We're going to get your Bibles, get your Bible apps, and maybe get your notepad going. Open them up to Luke 1 through 13. Whatever one you're comfortable with.
Well, whichever one I can see better. How about if we... Yeah. Okay. Luke 16, 1 through 13. Jesus told his disciples, there was a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions. So he called him in and asked him, what is this I hear about you? Give an account of your management, because you cannot be manager any longer. The manager said to himself, what shall I do now? My master is taking away my job. I'm not strong enough to dig, and I am ashamed to beg. I know what I'll do so that when I lose my job here, people will welcome me into their houses. So he called in each of his master's debtors. He asked the first, how much do you owe my master? 800 gallons of olive oil, he replied. The manager told him, take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 400. Then he asked the second. How much do you owe? 1,000 bushels of wheat, he replied. He told him, take your bill and make it 800. The master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. For the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are the people of the light. I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourself, so that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwelling. Whoever can trust with very little can also be trusted with much, and whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. So if you have not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? And if you have not been trustworthy with someone else's property, who will give you property of your own? No servant can serve two masters. Either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money.
Thank you, Karen. There's a lot here to cover. But this is a story about a rich guy, a nobleman, who finds out he's being cheated. He's being cheated by one of his own employees, and probably for a long time. So he fires him. And then this guy does something unethical. And this is where it gets a little confusing. We look at this scripture and we say, what? How does this work out? See, the twist of the story is, instead of being outraged, this nobleman praises this manager for being shrewd. How does that happen? Especially as everybody's getting their W-2s, right? Well, and we talk about unethical stuff, okay? So you see, so I want to get this set so we understand how this culture works, how this Palestinian culture, how this Middle Eastern culture works. You see, Western thinkers miss this whole point. As raised in America, we don't even see the connection here. We're looking at this story and say, how is this even possible? All right, so this is where we have to understand a little bit of history here. So this is what's happening. This story Jesus is talks about in 4 scenes. We're going to try and unpack these scenes. We're going to try and show it maybe in 8K, so we get this full understanding of what's really happening here, so we can kind of step into the story and we kind of see the discussions that are going on at the same time. So here we are in scene 1, and we're in the master's office. Okay, in this scene, there are 3 characters are introduced, though there's only 2 of them actually in the room. Okay, we get this room, we get kind of probably this cold, kind of concrete type walls going on. No windows, just holes in the walls. The first character is the master. He's a wealthy Eastern landowner. All right. Jesus calls him the rich man. And the people in the area, they respect him. They know he's rich. They respect him. They respect him so much, they tell him that the regional manager is cheating them. So right there is a kind of this breaking confidence with that regional manager. Jesus' exact words in verse 2, there was a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions. So what's going on? So the manager asks him about it calmly and graciously. He doesn't scold him. He doesn't berate him. He doesn't threaten him. He doesn't demand repayment or put him in jail. All of those things kind of hit a little bit alarming with the Middle Eastern thought, because it was well within his right to do. So this is already kind of a strange story as Jesus's inner circle is hearing this. Now, the landlord does this impressive thing. See, the second character is this manager. He's an agent, middleman, managing the property. He's been managing them, or what we'll call mismanaging them. But we would say maybe cooking the books. All right, maybe there's 2 sets of books going on. In the Mishnah, which is this Jewish commentary, it's going back to about the 3rd century. It said managers. Now, you can understand the state of this guy, what the position this guy had was not only he was a manager, he was legally recognized. He played this management function. Hebrew would call it the shula. All right, he was a very educated man, worked all his life with people, with contracts. He was like, he knew the inside out of all this stuff and how to make things work. All right, so he had respect. He had a certain position in society. And all the people hearing this story knew this. This third group was only hinted at, and those are the debtors. Those are the peasant farmers, the sharecroppers, if you will. Each year, they would negotiate with this manager, all right? They would negotiate certain terms, farm the number of acres in exchange for the right to farm, what he's going to give the master as far as, bushels, as far as olive oil, whatever else the land was producing. That would all be worked out with him, with the sharecroppers and the manager. This was just how things were done. All the time. Now, when we think about this, it would be like farm credit. I got to need seed. I got to work this out. And how much am I going to pay? That's a very legalized system. This was the same thing. So we kind of step into this Palestinian culture. So the people, it's the sharecroppers that blew the whistle on this shrewd manager. And this sets up the action. The master calls the manager in and says, "What's this I hear about you?" All right. The master is real careful. He doesn't say, "I've heard you've been cheating." All right. This is, hang on a sec. Let me gather my thoughts here. The manager doesn't say, "I've heard you've been cheating." He just says, "What's this I hear about you?" And the listeners in Jesus' story, they would expect one response from the manager, and that would be silence. And that's exactly what happened. The manager didn't say anything because the manager wasn't quite sure what the master knew. He wasn't going to confess to something unless, he didn't know. if he knew one or two things that he was cooking the books for, or the whole thing. So he just stays quiet, doesn't say anything. And then the manager says, you can no longer be the manager. We could translate that to say, you're fired, you're done. Don't let the door hit you on your way out. And back in those days, unlike today where everybody thinks they have a right to this, and severance pay, and what about my back pay, and what about all this stuff, and what about my health insurance for the next year and everything else? No. Get this. When you were fired, you were fired. You didn't get any more money. How about that? There wasn't any entitlement. And the manager knew this. And all the people hearing this story knew this. But what the people would expect to hear from the manager at this point was a debate. Was for the manager to start telling him why he shouldn't be fired. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe it was an oversight. He would blame the manager. He would blame other people for the problem, but not him. That would be the expectation that the people Jesus were talking to would have heard. Oh, it's just an oversight. I'm innocent. I should be retained. But nothing came out of the manager. He was still silent. And that silent is significant because that silent means this. I'm guilty. The master knows I'm guilty. The master expects obedience, and get this, disobedience, there's judgment for. And then he's thinking, I cannot get my job back by any excuses. So this is all part of that silence that's happening in this story. Shrewd manager, he doesn't dwell on getting his job back because he knows that's not going to happen. So he tries to put all of his energy into what's going to happen next. He's trying to figure this out real quick. His mind's kind of racing. He's thinking as he leaves the office, what to do. The door closes. He thinks to himself, at least I didn't get thrown in jail, which the Mishnah would have said that would have been guaranteed because you would have had to pay back everything that you would have owned. They used to throw people in jail and have them pay back everything, which was a debtor's prison. Okay, that was all the way to 1800s. That was all. It was a thing, and that was definitely a thing back in Jesus's day. So then the manager kind of figures this out. This master is a merciful man, and this is significant. So scene 2 plays out. In verse 2, the master says, give an account of your management. So how does an accountant account for his work? He keeps records. And in Middle Eastern culture, when a person is fired, it's point blank, and now he's been asked to show the books. So this is what he's got to do. He's got to figure out what to do. He's got to turn the books in. And then in verse 3, it says, what shall I do? My master has taken away my job. I'm not strong enough to dig. I'm too ashamed to beg. So his mind's all swirling about this as he's on the way to get the books. He knows he can't do anything labor. He knows no one in the community is going to hire him because they don't trust him. Nobody likes him. His popularity is gone. So what does he do? He's thinking he's got to trust his master's reputation. He's got to trust his master's mercy because he's not thrown in jail yet. And now he's been asked to give him the books. The fact that his master didn't demand repayment or make a big fuss in that scene, the first scene, was a big deal. And this manager knows that. So here we go. In scene 3, we have the books. All this plan is hatched, and ironically, it has nothing to do, get this, it has nothing to do with the manager, but it has everything to do with the master. It kind of flipped around a little bit. It's all about the master. See, the manager has to move fast because he knows because of his future, the villagers' perception on him. He's got to move quick enough so that everybody in the village still thinks that this guy is acting on the master's behalf. It's the only way this plan is really going to work. The debtors have to assume that he's still in authority and that everything that's going to happen to these books are what the master wants. So, okay. Now, keep in mind, back in those days, you didn't have the cloud. You didn't have the internet. You didn't have Microsoft Drive. So this was he's got to go physically get these books. Yeah, I remember doing back in the days before Excel, you had these long, man, they were like almost as long as this table. Open it up and you take your pencil and you go one by. I used to have to do payroll by hand for a lot of people, right? And you did one person all the way across. And you had to do that like for 400 or 500 people. It took forever. And it was all paper. Crazy stuff, right? That's how books were done for centuries. And it was that book that this guy was going to get. He's got all these books and scrolls and everything. So he gets those. He gets those scrolls. He gets those books. And he says, he gets all this. This first farmer comes on the scene in verse 5. Quick, how much do I owe you? How much do you owe my master? He says. And the farmer says, 800 gallons of olive oil. The manager tells him this: take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 400. So he's already assuming that the master agrees with this. They're working out the terms and conditions. This is a legal contract. The manager was responsible for the legal contract. So this is all right. This was not like unusual. The second guy comes in. How much do I owe you? 1,000 bushels of wheat. Sounds like a lot. Take your bill and make it 800. So he's making these changes in writing on their bill, in the books, so that he can take these books to the manager, and he does it time and time and time again. It works out to be about 500 denarii. We'll get into that in a little bit. He's not worried about the percentages. This guy is worried about the speed. He's got to make all this happen quick because he's on his way to the master's house. Now, the only way this plan works is that those debtors fully understand that his master wants this to happen. And so far, it's working. No one's come in to him and say, hey, you've been fired. That would blow the whole plan. So the manager, he's working on this real quick. It's not unusual in the Middle Eastern thought that this would happen. The Mishnah says there's a lot of times when the books, the conditions would change, but it would only be because of the sharecroppers would come and say, hey, there's been a drought. They've got blight. Certain things have happened to the land. I need to change the conditions. It would always be from the sharecropper, not coming from the master, though. This was a little different. 500 denarii works about to be a year and a half pay. So as quick as he can, he's making all these reductions. Imagine this. Imagine you just bought a car. And then you get a call from the guy who just sold you. You say, hey, did you get the check yet? You said, what check? I said, well, you should be getting a check for $10,000. Why? He says, well, I just talked to the company and they said, I worked it out. We're just going to give you that because you're a good customer. $10,000. Guess who's your best friend? That salesman. Legal money, you can put it in the bank. You can cash that check. This is what's kind of happening here. Now, that would be kind of cool, right? If we got $10,000 check, yeah, we would take that money and run. This is what happened to the landowners. I mean, the sharecroppers, they're taking the money, they're celebrating. So here we go in scene 4. Everything's coming clear. The manager reaches the master's office. The ink's still wet on the contract. But the master sees what's happening here. He can hear what's going on in the streets. There's this joy in the streets. All these people are saving money. They're throwing a party. They're celebrating in the name of the most gracious, merciful master. They know this was a good guy. He can hear this gratitude going on. And here's the rub. He can explain to the community now that this reduction, this was a mistake. That you really do owe what you owe. So now his name's gone from marvelous to mud like that. He's just a stingy old guy, wants all of his money. Now we know how quick popular opinion can change. Just look what happened to Jesus. 1 week, everybody's praising him. The next week, crucify him. Follow the news for a day, and you see all the changes. Follow Follow the impeachment stuff, and you can see all this stuff going on and on. The human condition hasn't changed. And the master knows this. The master's plugged into this. He can keep silent and accept the praise and allow this clever manager to ride high on this popular enthusiasm. So what does he do? The master kind of considers his choices, reputation, character, money. It was a no-brainer. He turns to the manager and says, "Shrewd move. You're a scallywag," which is a Navy term, by the way. All right. That just means someone who hasn't really crossed the equator. I've crossed the equator, so I'm not a scallywag. But he said, "You're a scallywag. You're a scoundrel, but a wise one." And this is where this loses context in our American thinking, but not with the people that Jesus was talking to, because they were plugged into what was going on. There's a story Middle Easterners tell of this condemned murderer, the Sultan Saladin. This killer was condemned to death, but kept crying, "I want to see the Sultan." And finally, he was taken where he cried out, "Oh, most gracious Sultan, my sins are great, but the mercy of the Sultan is even greater." And this guy was released. Because we've talked about this. This is getting back to what's important in Middle Easterners' thought is saving face and reputation. It's more important than money. The Bible says this: a good name is more desirable than great riches, to be esteemed better than silver and gold in Proverbs 21:1. So Middle Easterners believe that completely he was saving face. This was important. Reputation was important. And this is how the story pans out. The question is, what will the manager think about his situation? And will he make the most of his opportunity? Well, Jesus said the shrewd move is to trust the master's mercy. This is where the shrewd move comes in. The shrewd move is for the manager to bet the farm on who he knows the master to be. And we know the master died on the cross for us. So what are you going to do with the one asset that you've got? The one asset that you got, and I'm not talking about the money that's in your bank. I'm talking about you. You. What are you going to do with it? The shrewd guy used it to gain a future for himself. But then Jesus starts giving us these lessons right after this. And again, keep in mind, he's talking to his close group of friends, not the Pharisees. And he says, "I tell you, use your worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves, so that," and the "so that's" important here, "that when it's gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings." Translate it. You've got one life to live. Use it to enhance your future in heaven, not on earth. Use it to have a burden for people that don't know Jesus, your family, the people you live with, the people you work with that haven't accepted Jesus, that might just be playing church. This is where you're gaining in the next, when we die, when we go to heaven. What's going to happen when we go to heaven? Are you investing anything into your eternity and the eternity of others? Do you even care about that? No, I got to do this, and this. I got to pay the rent. I got this bill. I got that bill. What do you mean I got to worry about this stuff? And Jesus is saying clearly, you got your priorities all whacked. And this is one of the things he's trying to pull out here. You see, heaven is a place that welcomes you and I and your friends, that you're helping them want to see Jesus because of how you treat them. You're going to help them see Jesus more clearly because of how you're compassionate to him, how you love him. Or you're going to say, "Man, I don't want anything to do with Jesus because you are mean. Your mouth runs. You're cussing all the time. You're doing stuff that's dishonest. I don't want anything to do with your God." Think about it. You've probably heard that before. And that's what we need to break that cycle of. That's what we need to make sure. How are we investing our life? Imagine being in heaven, a bunch of people giving you high fives. Man, the only reason I'm here is because of you helping me, pointing me to Jesus. We heard a story about that happening today already. Real life story, real people. It happens because of our care for people. But do we have that burden? And then Jesus is teaching us his second lesson. Whoever can be trusted with very little can be trusted with much. Whoever is dishonest with little will be dishonest with much. So if you've not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? And if you haven't been trustworthy with someone else's property, who will give you your property over your own? And Jesus is making this point very clear. We're talking about heaven here. We're talking about caring for people's soul. Can God trust you with that? Can God trust you with wanting to care for people like that? Or are you just too self-absorbed to worry about that? Or you'll get to it later when this happens and this happens and this happens. You know, that never happens. There'll always be something else. Always. What do you want entrusted to me? So what's Jesus going to entrust with you? Think about that. What has he entrusted to you? What are you doing with it? Jesus says no servant can serve two masters. He'll either hate one or serve the other. He'll either be devoted to one or despise the other. You can't serve God and money. This is pretty clear. This is like forever, centuries. This is all part of this story of the shrewd manager. And it all points us to be caring for people's souls and reaching kids for Jesus, reaching our coworkers for Jesus, reaching the people we're around, our families for Jesus because of the way we act and care for them. You know, this is how it pans out. So what's your spiritual journal? I told you last week. Where is your spiritual journal can be found? Your check register. Go look at it. Go look at it. Figure out where you're serving your priorities. Is Jesus in there? Is God anywhere? And if so, what percentage? Are you bringing the tithe to God's storehouse? Probably not. Most Americans, if they give maybe 2%. That's a high. God doesn't say 2%. He says 10%. And you can say, well, God doesn't say the tithe is worth it. No, stop. God expects you to give because it's his. It's about letting go of what God's already given you. Who are you serving is the point. It's not the money behind it. It isn't. Are you serving God? Are you giving God? Is he entrusting you with people's souls? Or he's not trusting you with anything because, man, you can't even be trusted with what you're getting. Lies, all this stuff going on. And this is where the shrewd manager comes in. He trusted in the master. And that's what he's asking us to do, to trust in Jesus, to understand this is where we've got to be at. And all the resources God's giving us is just a way to make that work. He's asking us to use our worldly wealth so that we can have an impact on souls. Not that we can get a better car, but we can have an impact on souls so they can go to heaven, so they can see that we're genuine, that we love people the way Jesus loved us. And this is the whole point. So, we've been talking about, as we just wrap up, the so what behind it. Last week, the so what was trying to come home to Jesus. And a lot of you guys came forward last week and we prayed and we closed and we sang right up here. This week, what I'm asking you to do is ask God to give you a heart for people. To give you a heart for people. Where are they at with Jesus? And it's just, it's not something you can just get on Facebook and say, hey, you need Jesus. Share this and you'll get Jesus. Stop. Don't do that. That's dumb. All right? People need to hear you. People need to see your heart. You got people you see every day. Ask God to give you a heart for those people. Continue to pray that way. How do you want me to invest my one and only life? In who? And I ask that God would give you a name. He doesn't need to give you 20 names. He needs to give you one, maybe two. that you can focus on maybe this week, maybe this year, as we care for the community. That God is going to shake up your life, maybe shake up your heart a little bit, to say, I'm going to love this person differently. I'm going to love the way this person, Jesus, loved me. And what did he do for you? Died. When you were scum, when you didn't deserve it, when you were the homeless guy, when you were the drug addict, when you were the whatever, Jesus still loved you and died for you. And he's asking you to do the same thing. And I'm asking that you just pray and ask God to give you that name of that person or those people that you need to make that change for and care for. Invite them here. Help them be excited to be in the house of the Lord. Help them feel the love of other people. It's good. It's good. Where we can talk about the Super Bowl and Jesus at the same time, and it's all right. Or whatever else we want to talk about, because we're family. Because we love each other. Through the good and the bad, we love each other. Where are you going to invest your life? Because Jesus is saying this as we close. Whoever can be trusted with very little can be trusted with much. This is going to change what we do. So let's stand and sing our last song.